What happens when the very system designed to protect you becomes the reason you lose your life? Lauren Johansen's nightmare began as a teenage love story filled with promise but spiraled into a tragic tale of violence, betrayal, and systemic failure. Lauren and Bryson Rivers were high school sweethearts, young and full of dreams. Everyone admired their relationship, the charming boy and the radiant girl who seemed destined for a bright future together. But behind the smiles and whispered words of affection, a dark reality lurked. The love that once bound them slowly turned into control, fear, and abuse. At first, the signs were subtle, a bruise here, a harsh word there, easy to dismiss or hide. Lauren's friends noticed her growing withdrawal, the way she flinched when Bryson raised his voice, the excuses she made to avoid social events. She tried to hold on, hoping things would get better, believing in the boy she once loved. But the cycle of violence only tightened its grip. Eventually, Lauren gathered the courage to escape. She fled, desperate for safety and a fresh start. Authorities became involved, Bryson was arrested, charged with assault, and a court ordered him to wear an ankle monitor, a device meant to keep him away from Lauren and to alert officials if he came near her. For a time, it seemed the system was working, a safeguard protecting a vulnerable woman. But beneath the surface, cracks were widening. The ankle monitor, that symbol of protection, became the very instrument of failure. Unknown to Lauren, Bryson found ways to tamper with it, disabling the device, slipping through the cracks in surveillance. Alarms went off, but warnings were ignored or dismissed as malfunctions. The system designed to keep Lauren safe was failing her when she needed it most. While Lauren tried to rebuild her life, Bryson moved freely, his presence looming like a shadow she could not escape. In Nashville, a violent incident led to Bryson's arrest again, offering a fleeting sense of hope that justice might finally prevail, that Lauren could breathe without fear. But this hope was cruelly short-lived. The ankle monitor's failure was never properly addressed. Communication breakdowns and negligence allowed Bryson's movements to go unchecked once more. After his release, he traveled across state lines undetected, crossing into Lauren's life with lethal intent. Lauren did not see him coming. The man she had loved, feared, and escaped from found her again, and this time the violence was fatal. She was beaten to death, her life extinguished in a brutal attack. Her family was shattered, her friends devastated, her community left grappling with grief and outrage. How could this have happened? How could a man with a violent history evade monitoring, slip past law enforcement, and commit such a horrific crime? Lauren's story exposed glaring flaws in the criminal justice system and the mechanisms meant to protect victims of domestic abuse. The broken ankle monitor was a symbol of a broken system, one that failed to act on warnings, failed to communicate critical information across agencies, and ultimately failed Lauren when she needed it most. Her murder became a tragic reminder that technology alone cannot protect victims without vigilant enforcement, accountability, and reform. Meanwhile, the nation's attention was also drawn to another chilling tragedy, the murder of UCLA graduate student Brianna Kupfer in a Los Angeles furniture store. Brianna's killer faced his fate in court, but the haunting echoes of violence and systemic failure rang loud in both cases. Two young women, full of life and potential, lost to senseless brutality that begged urgent questions about prevention and protection. Lauren's family, determined to prevent others from suffering similar fates, began demanding change. They called for better technology, stronger monitoring protocols, and improved coordination between law enforcement agencies. The hope was that their pain would fuel a movement for reform, a rallying cry to fix the system before more lives were lost. But change is slow. The question remains, will the system learn from Lauren's death? Will it finally close the loopholes that allowed Bryson Rivers to walk free, to hunt down the woman he abused? Agencies that let him travel undetected across state lines, and the harrowing legal battles Lauren's family endured as they fought for justice amid a tangled web of bureaucracy. We will uncover the systemic weaknesses that contributed to this tragedy and explore the ongoing fight to implement reforms that could save lives in the future. Lauren Johansen's murder is not just a story of heartbreak and loss, it's a stark warning about the consequences of a system that fails its most vulnerable. Stay with us as we peel back the layers of failure, accountability, and hope in the next chapter of this devastating true crime saga. because until these issues are addressed, no one can say who might be next. When Lauren Johansen's murder shocked a grieving community, questions quickly turned to how such a tragedy could happen despite the protections supposedly in place. The broken ankle monitor was at the heart of the failure, but the story behind how Bryson Rivers was able to disable and evade tracking is even more chilling. It exposes a web of negligence, communication breakdowns, and systemic flaws that ultimately cost Lauren her life. Ankle monitors, also called electronic monitoring devices, are intended to act as a lifeline for victims of domestic abuse and violent offenders. They are supposed to restrict offenders' movements, alert authorities if boundaries are crossed, and provide real-time tracking. But these devices are not foolproof, and in Lauren's case, they were fatally flawed. Investigations after the murder revealed that Bryson's ankle monitor had been tampered with multiple times over weeks, with several alerts triggered that went either unnoticed or were dismissed by monitoring agencies. These failures were compounded by staffing shortages and outdated monitoring protocols that lacked rigorous follow-up on suspicious activity. More disturbingly, it emerged that Bryson had removed the device entirely at some points without authorities being informed. This created windows of time where law enforcement had no way of knowing his location. Meanwhile, Bryson was free to travel, stalk, and prepare for his final attack on Lauren. The system designed to keep him tethered was, in truth, a broken promise. The failure extended beyond technology. Law enforcement agencies operate under complex jurisdictional boundaries, and coordination between counties and states is often inconsistent at best. Bryson's ability to cross state lines undetected was a glaring example of this. Even though some monitoring alerts were sent, they failed to trigger immediate investigations or interagency communication. The fragmented nature of information sharing meant that critical warnings fell through cracks, and no one pieced together the full picture until it was too late. Lauren's family, in their search for answers, discovered that several key opportunities to intervene had been missed. Calls from Lauren expressing fear went unanswered or were minimized by agencies overwhelmed with caseloads. The ankle monitor company itself admitted to failing to escalate alerts that indicated tampering. In court hearings after the murder, these admissions painted a disturbing picture of systemic complacency and under-resourcing. The legal aftermath was an arduous battle for Lauren's family. Not only did they face the heartbreak of losing a loved one, but they were forced to fight through bureaucracy and legal technicalities to hold accountable those responsible for oversight. Lawsuits were filed against monitoring companies and local agencies, seeking justice not only for Lauren but also demanding reform to prevent future tragedies. The fight attracted national attention and became part of a broader conversation about the effectiveness and reliability of electronic monitoring in domestic violence cases. Experts in criminal justice weighed in, highlighting that while ankle monitors have potential, their success depends on proper implementation and robust oversight. Technology alone cannot replace human vigilance, communication, and swift action. They warned that victims remain at risk as long as systemic gaps persist. Lauren's case tragically became the embodiment of these warnings, a stark example of what happens when technology fails and the system falters. Beyond the cold facts of the monitoring failure, there was a human story of desperation and courage. Lauren's friends recall her last attempts to escape the cycle of abuse. She sought help multiple times, reached out to shelters and law enforcement, and made plans to move to a new city. Each time, the fear of Bryson's reach was overwhelming. The broken ankle monitor was supposed to be a barrier, a shield, but instead, it was a veil hiding the danger closing in. Meanwhile, public outrage grew over the inadequacy of the protections for victims of domestic violence. Advocates called for immediate reforms including mandatory checks on monitoring devices, real-time interagency data sharing, and improved funding for domestic abuse prevention programs. Lauren's story became a rallying cry demanding that technology be paired with accountability, training, and victim-centered approaches. As Lauren's family mourned, they also looked across the country at cases like Brianna Kupfer's, another young woman taken too soon by violence. The parallels between these tragedies highlighted how pervasive and urgent the problem of violence against women remains. Both cases underscored the limitations of current systems and the desperate need for comprehensive change. The investigation into Bryson Rivers' actions after disabling his ankle monitor revealed meticulous planning. He had studied Lauren's routines, locations, and social circles. Reports indicate that he used multiple vehicles and stayed off main roads to avoid detection by law enforcement. His movements were traced back and forth between states, all while alerts from his monitoring device were either not transmitted or ignored. The sheer audacity and calculation in evading surveillance stunned many and raised alarm about how easily offenders can exploit system weaknesses. Behind closed doors, law enforcement officers involved in the case expressed frustration. They described how limited resources, outdated technology, and lack of cross-jurisdictional protocols hampered their ability to respond effectively. Many felt the system was set up to fail, with no easy fixes in sight. The broken ankle monitor was the first domino, but the cascade of failures did not end there. When Bryson was released after the Nashville arrest, he was supposed to be closely monitored. Instead, inadequate supervision and systemic inefficiencies gave him the freedom to move undetected. This exposed a fundamental flaw in how offenders are tracked and how victims are protected, or left exposed. Lauren's family established a foundation in her name, dedicated to improving domestic violence prevention and survivor support. Their mission is to ensure no other family suffers as they have. They work tirelessly with legislators, advocacy groups, and technology developers pushing for legislative changes to mandate better monitoring standards, quicker response protocols, and victim outreach. The Foundation's efforts have sparked some legislative progress in a few states, but national reforms remain slow and uneven. Critics warn that without sweeping federal mandates and funding, local and state agencies will continue to struggle with fragmented systems and resource constraints. It's clear the tragedy was not simply a failure of one device or one person but a systemic failure involving multiple layers of technology, policy, and human oversight. The broken ankle monitor symbolizes this failure, but beneath it lies a much larger crisis demanding urgent attention. What remains unanswered is how Bryson Rivers was able to exploit these failures with such deadly precision. What motivated him to continue his violent path despite repeated arrests and legal restrictions? How many warning signs were missed or ignored? And most importantly, what steps must be taken now to stop similar horrors from happening again? Lauren Johansen's story is far from over. The system failed her, but her legacy may yet drive the change desperately needed to save lives. When the dust settles on the tragic murder of Lauren Johansen, the search for answers intensifies. To truly understand how this nightmare unfolded, we must look deeper into the man behind the violence, his history, his mindset, and the patterns that foretold a deadly escalation. It is only through this lens that we can begin to unravel the root causes of such brutality and consider what reforms can meaningfully prevent future tragedies. Bryson Rivers was more than just a violent offender, he was a complex individual shaped by a toxic mixture of personal demons and unchecked behavior. Those who knew him describe a man with a volatile temper, a tendency toward controlling relationships, and a history of escalating violence. From his teenage years, warning signs appeared. Friends and family recall episodes of aggression, manipulation, and possessiveness. Yet despite multiple encounters with the justice system, little effective intervention was made to address the underlying causes or protect potential victims. Domestic violence experts emphasize that abusers like Bryson often follow a predictable trajectory, a cycle of charm and control, escalating to physical and emotional abuse. Without early and sustained intervention, these cycles grow more dangerous. Unfortunately, in Bryson's case, the system's response was reactive rather than preventive. Arrests and restraining orders were temporary measures, but without comprehensive treatment programs or rigorous monitoring, the underlying violence remained unchecked. Lauren's attempts to seek help, move away, and protect herself were courageous but tragically insufficient against this backdrop. Her story highlights the critical gap between victim advocacy and offender rehabilitation that many systems fail to bridge. It is not enough to simply punish violent behavior. Effective solutions must include counseling, behavioral therapy, and constant risk assessment. This is where reforms now gaining attention come into focus. Several states and advocacy groups are pushing for integrated domestic violence programs that combine law enforcement, mental health services, and community support. The goal is to create a holistic approach that not only monitors offenders but actively works to change their behavior and reduce recidivism. However, funding shortages and institutional inertia often stall these efforts, leaving victims vulnerable. At the same time, Lauren's case has fueled a debate about the technology used to monitor offenders. Electronic ankle monitors are widely used, but they have significant limitations. Technological failures, staffing shortages, and insufficient coordination all undermine their effectiveness. In response, innovators are developing new systems that use artificial intelligence and GPS analytics to provide real-time alerts and predictive risk modeling. These advanced tools promise faster detection of tampering and more proactive responses. Yet these innovations raise ethical concerns. Privacy advocates warn that increased surveillance can infringe on civil liberties and disproportionately impact marginalized communities. Balancing the safety of victims with the rights of offenders presents a complex challenge for lawmakers and technologists alike. Lauren Johansen's story forces us to confront these difficult questions: how far should monitoring go, and who decides the boundaries? Meanwhile, the fight for legislative change continues. Lauren's family and their foundation have become powerful voices in this arena, lobbying for stricter monitoring laws, mandatory interagency communication protocols, and increased funding for victim support services. Some states have begun adopting these reforms, but progress remains uneven nationally. Lawmakers face competing priorities, political hurdles, and budget constraints, complicating efforts to enact comprehensive policies. Public awareness campaigns spurred by Lauren's case have also sparked a broader conversation about domestic violence. Survivors have shared their stories, shining a light on the often hidden nature of abuse and the challenges victims face in seeking help. These movements are changing cultural perceptions, emphasizing that domestic violence is not a private issue but a public health crisis requiring systemic solutions. The parallels between Lauren Johansen's murder and that of Brianna Kupfer serve as a stark reminder of the ongoing risks women face. Both cases expose vulnerabilities in the justice system and highlight the urgent need for better protections. But beyond policies and technology, these stories reveal a deeper societal failure to recognize, confront, and dismantle the roots of violence, including toxic masculinity, power imbalances, and social stigma. At the core of reform efforts is the belief that no one should have to live in fear of the person they once trusted. Lauren's legacy is not only a call for improved systems but a plea for compassion, vigilance, and community responsibility. Preventing future tragedies requires collaboration across all sectors: law enforcement, healthcare, education, technology, and grassroots activism. As this chapter closes, the story of Lauren Johansen stands as both a painful testament and a beacon of hope. It reveals the devastating consequences when systems fail but also the potential for change when voices rise in unison. The broken ankle monitor was a symptom of a deeper dysfunction, one that demands urgent attention and action. What remains to be seen is whether the lessons of Lauren's case will inspire lasting reform or become another forgotten tragedy. Will technological advancements overcome institutional inertia? Can the justice system evolve to protect victims more effectively while respecting rights? How will society continue to confront the pervasive culture of violence that underpins these crimes? These questions linger, urging us all to remain engaged, informed, and proactive. Lauren's story is far from over. Her fight lives on in the efforts of those dedicated to transforming pain into progress. Because until these challenges are met head-on, the next tragedy could be just around the corner.